Alright, so my name is Ekki Scheffler. I work for JACOBS in New Zealand. At the moment I'm actually part of the SCIRT Alliance. SCIRT, that stands for Stronger Christchurch Infrastructure Rebuild Team. So SCIRT has been put together after the earthquakes that happened in 2011 in Christchurch that have destroyed vast parts of the city, as well as all the networks, underground networks, wastewater, stormwater, water supply, roads, bridges, etc. So it's just a few example pictures here. You can see on the map on the left-hand corner all the networks that have been affected or have been actually damaged during those earthquakes. So it makes up about 25% of the networks that need to be repaired and replaced over the time of SCIRT. About 750 kilometers of pipework, and we are estimating to have about 50,000 assets to be recorded that are being reconstructed or repaired over the time of SCIRT. So talking about S-builds, S-builds is really the data that we are collecting about those assets that have been constructed in the field. So that's, for example, a pipe, a manhole, whatever comes up. And what we need to record about those assets is, on the one hand side, of course, the spatial location where they are, and it goes back into our GIS system. But on the other hand, we also have a whole lot of attributes to record with every asset. So say for a manhole, you're recording the material, you're recording the size, the manufacturer, and so on. There's a whole lot of information that needs to be recorded. And for that purpose, we have developed over the time of SCIRT a guideline that clearly outlines the way how those assets have to be recorded. So it has clear instructions on what's the attributes to be recorded for a pipe, for a manhole, for a sump, whatever it is. And to make that attribute recording easier for the people who are out in the field, we thought iForm is probably a good solution. The challenge there was to set up a form that is made up of 61 forms on the iForm app, with about 1,200 elements in it and around 600 pixels value still growing. So that's the point where we realized we can't do this manually, especially keeping it up to date and maintaining these forms. That needs to be automated. So we were looking for a solution where we can access the app through an API and actually set it up automatically. So this is the process how we use the iForm app at SCIRT at the moment, and that's really just a very simple overview of how we use it. You've got on the left-hand side there our schema, so that comes out of our guideline which clearly defines what asset types do we have to record, what attributes has each asset type, what type of fields do we have, etc., and so on. There's all the options in the schema, so everything is practically organized in the schema, and whenever you need to change something on the app, whenever you need to change something on how we record our data in GIS, how we process our data, how the data gets mapped to other data sets, everything is actually recorded in that schema. So to actually then create the iForm app, we are using the API, and we are addressing the API through FME. I'm going to explain in a moment what FME is for those who've never used FME in the past. Then the user fills out the information, obviously, in the app, and that gets synced back to the iFormBuilder private database and gets posted to FME server, where it then gets written back into our native environment, into our database here. And before I carry on with the FME side, I will just quickly actually give you an idea of what our app looks like. So that's the app as we have it at the moment, and you can see that there's our survey form, and it lets you fill out the simple information that goes with the project, and then you can go into more detail here with all the different asset types. So, for example, if you go for a manhole, then you just select your manhole, and it lets you then provide all the information that's required for a manhole, for example. So back to the presentation. really what I'm going to look at in this presentation, what I'm looking at in this presentation is really just that part, how we create the form. I'm not going to go into how we actually bring the data back into our database. So what is actually SME? Why do we use SME? SME is a piece of software. It's called Feature Manipulation Engine by Safe Software. You have to imagine it like a tool that lets you create a script through a graphical user interface. So you can put together a whole lot of, let's call it building blocks of script, which is really easy to maintain and easy for everyone who is not so good with scripting. So also for me, just starting with the API, it's been really easy to use SME and to run the API through SME. And the main piece here is actually one of those building blocks. They're also called transformers in SME, which is called the HTTP caller, with which you can address the API as well. So you can do your HTTP method. In this case here, you see it's the post method, and you've got your URL in here, and you can use variables in there. So as you probably all know, you need to put in your page ID, you need to put in your profile ID, etc. So that's a variable that comes out of the whole SME process, can be set as a parameter that the user can change, so that it's really easy to run the script and create your forms using that. And then, of course, you've got all the other settings that you need to set as your headers and your body, which goes in this JSON code. So the actual SME process, what does it actually do? So again, on the left-hand side, there's our schema, and it defines the different domains, so the different pick list values, they go into the option list, all the different asset types that we want to define in our form, and then the field and field types, and there's a whole lot of other information in there that I haven't listed here, but all that goes into the process. So the SME process just reads the schema, and that sits really just in our database. So SME reads hundreds of different formats. It doesn't really matter where you save it or how you save it. And there's probably no news to those who've created a form through the API already. You've got to create your option lists, and then you create your main page and your sub pages, and then you go about creating your elements on your sub page and creating your elements on your main page. And when you create your option list, it returns the IDs of the option list, of course. And you create your pages, and you get the IDs of your pages back, and that feeds back into creating then the elements for the sub page and the main page. And from all that process, I'm actually writing out a log, which makes it then easier for me to later on maintain the form, so I can easily go in and update the form by knowing what's that option list ID, etc. So that's all saved in the background as well. So just to give you a better idea of SME, I will just quickly switch over to SME, so you know what the process actually looks like. And that's really just a very quick overview. So you see it's a chain of all those transformers or building blocks in the script, and you can change that around, and you can change all the parameters of each one. So for example, you've got a tester, and the tester is nothing else but a conditional, so you can test for something and make something happen based on whatever happens. And so this is the thing. You then go through all these steps here. So this is creating the option list. I've called a pick list here. And further down, it creates the sub pages and the main pages. And then it creates further down here the elements. And when you run it, you can actually set a few parameters. So if I need to update my token, which I probably have to before I run it, I can put it in here, and a few things that I want to appear in my form. And very handy as well, I can actually run the whole thing just in test mode, which means it's not actually going out to the API, it's not making any change on my iFormBuilder, but I can actually see what would happen if I did run it like that. So I leave it now in test mode, and I just run it. It's just going to take a few seconds while SME runs through that thing. And you can actually watch it as it goes in here. You will see there's a number of things coming up. So it tells you how many records are going through there. And then now that I've run it in test mode, it's just opening up the table so I can check what would have happened if I put that up through the API. So that's really handy for testing for for a testing environment before you actually put it into production. So you see on my main page, I would have had all those parameters in there, and here's my option list, and they would look like this, like you can see on this table. So as I said, that's a really handy tool that makes it also very easy to maintain for anyone else who is not so good with scripting, because SME is actually quite easy to learn. So what's been the difficulties that we came across? There's a few things, especially when you're new to the API, that might make you wonder what's going on. And some errors just come up as a generic error. You don't even know exactly what is wrong with your script. So for example, in my case, I had a maximum number of forms set to my account by our admin. And so it was set to 60, but I actually had to upload 61. So in the last form, I got a generic error, but it didn't tell me what was wrong with it. And it took me a while to figure that one out. Or the other thing that happened was it returns an error if you use field names that are obviously not allowed in iFormBuilder. iFormBuilder, if you actually do it on the actual iFormBuilder control panel, then it tells you this field name is not allowed, so you can't use steps or name or whatever you want to use here. But if you do it, if you just run it up through the API, it's not going to give you that error. It just tells you generic. That went wrong, can't do it. And that's quite difficult then to figure out if you're not very good with these things, if you're not into that. So another example there is when you're referencing your option list. So if you want to pre-populate your fields with an option list value already, you've got to use the ID in those curly brackets. And if you don't do it, it still works, but just not for position 0 for whatever reason. So that's another thing that I got stuck with for a little moment. But again, the iFormBuilder support is really great. We hear that from Mark as well. I just got in touch through the chat, and it all got resolved really quickly there. Another thing that caused me a little bit of an issue there was the order of the list index of the option lists. So if I'm adding another option to my option list, I can either add it right to the end of it, and it's just getting the next ID up, or I can actually add it with an ID that I have already, if I wanted to get in the right order alphabetically, for example. But then it gets a bit messy because you're using duplicate IDs, and then it's just better to recreate the whole option list ID. So that's, I think, it's not ideal at the moment, or I might have missed something. I'll be happy to learn about a better solution there. It also took me a while to actually find out how you make a form accept a blank field. So if the field has a client validation against it, so you put in, you've got a number field and you say the number needs to be between 0 and 10, then the form always complains and saying, oh, you need to put in a number between 0 and 10 even if I leave the field blank. So it took me a while to actually understand that the field is undefined until you've actually touched it, so you need to include that into your JavaScript in your client validation there. A few other things like setting the keyboard type wasn't very greatly documented on the website. It only lists all the different types of keyboards, but actually not what the ID is of those ones, because you have to tell the API what the ID of the keyboard type is. Things like that, encoding JSON characters. When you create your JSON code, you need to make sure that all the special characters that JSON doesn't like straight out need to be encoded for JSON, otherwise it falls over. And one last thing is the token expires obviously after 1 hour. So you can include that into your script to refresh the token. And fortunately, my script, as I'm running it now, it finishes in 45 minutes, so that's all good. But whenever it runs a bit longer, then I need to think about how I can refresh the token there automatically. So just to keep that in mind as well. And my advice for beginners with the API, as I've shown you in our SME script here, just set yourself up so you can run it in a test mode without actually putting it straight up. So you can play around with it, you can see what's happening, you can see all the different parameters that would go up if you did run it. So you're not wasting time with deleting forms again, you're not wasting your API calls if you're limited with that, etc. And then you can just run it as a subset if you just want to run it quickly just to see what's happening and see it live on your iFormBuilder account. And then as well, it's very handy to record all those HTTP responses that you're getting back from iFormBuilder. So if something does go wrong, the debugging is really easy to be done. What's also really handy to do is use software like Postman or Fiddler to actually do some tests in case you're in doubt about what your script is doing. So you can do that manually and try out a few API calls that way. That really makes it easier if you're getting stuck somewhere. And the last thing is try FME. It really made it easy for me there. Right. Any questions?
Not so much right now. I think that was so helpful, and I think showing off a tool like FME, at least I know before you brought it to my attention, I was never aware of it, and that's a great way for people to kind of become more familiar with using API as well as our own API. The one thing I do want to mention is I just put into the chat box, we do have a help desk article on terms that you can't use that aren't database friendly. Now, I know that wouldn't help you because the error message doesn't appear, but maybe referencing that list could be assisting, could assist you when you're actually building out your forms. A big thank you to you. I mean, that was very, very helpful. I loved how you were able to give us an example of your workflow as well and what the users are experiencing on their device. So thank you very much for your time.